Can we have our next inductee, Mr. Dave Downey, come to the stage? And here we go. We're looking right here at a two-time Canadian middleweight boxing champion, ladies and gentlemen. When he was born on February 18th, 1942, Nova Scotia had long enjoyed a rich reputation as the most successful boxing province in Canada. Names like George Dixon and Sam Langford were familiar to many Blue Nosers as black role models. Because of the huge number of American literary effects, books, magazines, etc., there were still a number of Nova Scotian kids who did not know as much about their heritage as they might have. And some of you may have heard Sandy Young tell the story about how 20 years ago he stopped a little black kid on Gottingen Street and asked him if he knew who George Dixon was, and his response was all too typical. He said George Dixon wasn't a who, it was a what. It was the playground up the street. Much has changed since then, thank goodness, and one of the major reasons Nova Scotians are much more aware of their local boxing has to do with the continued success over many years of a Halifax family called the Downeys. Young David had plenty of, absolutely, yeah, let it go. He still looks exactly the same. Exactly. Young David had plenty of role models in his house. 5 older brothers led him into the world of sport, and he attended Joseph Howe School, where he showed good form as an all-around athlete, taking part in softball, basketball, volleyball, baseball, track, and swimming. He played baseball for the Eastern Canadian Junior Baseball Championship team before moving on to play with the Senior A Halifax Cardinals. Due to his quickness, Dave was an outstanding defensive basketball player for the Community YMCA's first championship team. As a youngster, Dave dreamed of a career in professional hockey, but realizing that he wasn't a good skater, he turned in other athletic directions. And he was certainly influenced by the fact that 5 of his older brothers boxed. Don, Billy, and Bobby were professionals, and David's early training came in the many neighborhood street fights that forced him to learn to defend himself. His formal training began at 15 when he joined the Rock and Roll Club on Creighton Street in Halifax. An important turning point in his life came when he met Murray Langford, a descendant of the legendary Sam Langford, who would later become his manager. If you don't know, Sam Langford was then still listed by the editor of Ring magazine as 7th best heavyweight boxer in history, despite the fact that he had never even fought for the World Championship from Weymouth Falls, Nova Scotia. Murray Langford was very impressed with Dave's natural style. He once remarked that the way Dave worked the heavy bag reminded him of a musician playing music. His obvious talent as a boxer-puncher scared many potential opponents away. His first professional fight came, believe it or not, as a 15-year-old. In 1957 at the Halifax Forum, where Dave knocked out Kenny Chinn in 2 rounds. Downey won 2 more recorded fights, then suffered his first setback, a 2-round knockout loss to Claude Labonte in Montreal. Dave rebounded from that setback to win 5 in a row, including 4 by knockout. He once ventured to New York, where he did extremely well in sparring sessions against the likes of Dick Tiger, a Nigerian who later won world titles in the middleweight and light heavyweight divisions. In 1967, the Canadian Boxing Federation sanctioned a title bout between Downey and Jimmy Mueller, a rugged scrapper from Windsor, Ontario. The judges awarded Downey a lopsided unanimous decision, and he was presented with the championship belt. He retained the Canadian title all through the rest of the decade, but was unable to lure any world-class contenders into the ring. On December 18, 1970, a determined Dave Downey decision to Gary Broughton from Brantford, Ontario, to regain his crown. He remained champion over the next 5 years. Dave Downey was finally dethroned by fellow Nova Scotian Lawrence Hafey of Stellarton by decision in 1975. In appreciation of the champion's loyalty to his hometown, Halifax held a Dave Downey Day on November 18, 1972, where Dave received tributes from Halifax Mayor Walter Fitzgerald, Dartmouth Mayor Rolly Thornhill, Premier Gerald Regan, and a growing legion of fans. Dave Downey's 20-year record shows 38 wins against only 4 losses and 2 draws. He could look back on having been a 2-time Canadian middleweight champion and having held the title for 11 years. He was elected to the Canadian Boxing Hall of Fame in 1976, received the Gashouse Gang Community Award in 1971-72, and an Amateur Boxing Award in 1984. A bust of Dave Downey was placed at the Black Cultural Center in 1982, and in 1989 he received a Community Recognition Award and was an honoree at a Night of Black Achievement in 1992. After his retirement, Dave retained his interest in the sport, passing his knowledge on to a new generation in his fighting family. Among others, he trained nephews Downey and Kevin Downey during their rise to the top of the Canadian and international amateur boxing ranks. And in September of 1988, Dave traveled to Seoul, Korea, where he watched his son, Sugar Ray Downey, win an Olympic boxing bronze medal in the light middleweight category. Ladies and gentlemen, a man who was Canadian middleweight boxing champion from 1967 to 1973 and regained and held the title years later. We welcome to the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame, Mr. Dave Downey. Our newest member of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame, Dave Downey. We heard in your bio that you were a heck of an all-around athlete. Bad hands, though. A heck of an all-around athlete as a youngster. And I wonder why you chose boxing. What attracted you to that?
Well, I didn't choose it. I guess it chose me. I was good in all sports. That's the way I learned how to play all the sports. I wanted to win, and I guess that's what happened. I learned how to box.
38, 4, and 2. Which of those really stand out in your mind to this day?
Well, the one that stands out the most is the one that I won the title, only winning winning 8 fights as an amateur, not as an amateur, as an undercard, like a 6-round special, and being able to be in the position to jump and fight Jimmy Mueller, who was ready to fight Blair Richardson for the title. Blair took sick, and he didn't go through with the fight, and also they asked me would I fight him, and I said yes.
Your first pro fight at the age of 15, was there fear? Was there excitement? What was there?
No, there was no fear because I'm used to getting spiked playing baseball and that. And I said, so it was no fear. And plus, learning the box around the street, carrying on. I had a few friends in the neighborhood that used to spar with me while I was in the sea cadets and things like that.
What about your trip to Seoul, Korea in 1988? How fun was that to watch?
That was a very fun trip for me, but I was a little scared in Seoul because of the way things were there, seeing the people there walking around with machine guns, holding them up and everything, and I'm saying, what am I doing across here in another country? And going there to see my son, this is what I wanted to see, if he could only win one fight, something that I never did, which I would have loved to have fought for the Olympics, but I was already a Canadian champ, and I said I had to go for the support of my son.
It must have made you realize that Nova Scotia is a pretty special place.
And Nova Scotia is a special place. This is my home. This is where I stayed. Everybody says to me, why didn't you venture and stay in the States? I had the pleasure of having 5 world champion trainers train me, and like I said, the rest is history.
Are we glad he stayed? Dave Downey.